Hey, this is Jake. You're in Jake's shop. Got my grandfather's Corvette out of here, and I finally got the rear axle done. I kind of wanted to do that while the Corvette was in here because this is going to be a mess. Next step in the process, finish the underside of this car, spray some primer on it, and undercoat it. Before I do that, I'll show you a little bit what I did. I probably got a few hours into just cleaning this. Used a lot of different things, and without a sandblaster or an industrial grade, abrasive devices of some sort, it takes a little more elbow grease. A scraper is. I used a lot of a scraper. It's get the bulk of it off, the big chunks, everything, kind of get it loosened up, and just take your time. The next thing I did was wire brushes. They come in really handy, and I'll show you a little bit about what I did with those. Just the standard wire wheels. This is on my angle grinder, and then a cut brush as well. That kind of knocks the big portions of it off. Just using a cut brush. So using some of that stuff to kind of clean it up. I tried actually a new tool as well. I use a lot of Ferd stuff. Get them from Pacific Welding. The guys over there, at least on the West Coast, treat me pretty well, and I really like their products. You're going to spend a little more money for them a lot of times, but they last so much longer. It really does pay off. So anyways, this is a flapper disc that also fits on my 1/4-inch grinder. And it's kind of got a built-in buffing capacity. So this is really good for getting into little areas and cleaning out the rest of that rust or paint and grime and what have you. Flapper discs work really well, especially in the big open areas. You definitely want to be wearing a lot of safety gear when you're doing that. But again, this is kind of an example. This is a Harbor Freight's version. And these spin on and off with the keys on your grinding wheel or a grinder. Ferd makes them, and you can see the difference. These last 10 times longer. They cut 10 times better. They're 10 times more expensive. And I always spend an extra buck or two and get the side that actually has the shank on it. You just spin it right on and off your grinder, no problem. You don't have to use the keys that come with the grinder to actually pin it into place and sandwich it into place. So those have worked really well for me, especially on the main areas. Outside of that, after a lot of the cleaning is done, I went ahead and a little extra precaution. I went ahead and sprayed a product. This is from Duplicolor, and this is called Rust Fix. I've used it in the past, at least on the underside of a car. I probably wouldn't use it with body work, but this basically turns rust into primer. And especially for a lot of those little areas where there's creases in the middle and they're getting into each other, and there's areas you're just not going to be able to get access to no matter what. And without, you can get your hand in there maybe with a little sandpaper and clean up the bulk of it. But this kind of also gets in there the rest of it, and this says you can paint right over it. So that's what I use. Probably a can and a half of that on the underside of the car in some different areas. I don't have a whole lot more to clean, really. It's going to kind of look like that. The 2K primers, as long as that paint and everything's etched in there, it'll etch right into that. As long as you got good adhesion and you've got all the loose stuff up and all the rust and stuff is off of there, that's really what you're trying to do. Show you a little bit about what I'm going to do next. Next clip, it'll be all masked off. But this is a 2K primer from Upol. I've actually used this stuff in the past. This is a high build primer. I could probably thin it out a little bit if I'm just using it more of a sealer. But this is a 2-in-1 product, so you can actually seal and prime with it, which is kind of the same thing. But primer, it'll build up so you can block it down and work out dents. Obviously, on the underside of the car, I don't really care about dents too much. Definitely want to make sure it's just adheres, and then the product that I put over the top of it adheres to that. So there's a couple things you'll want to do when you do that, and that's basically not letting it sit more than like a day or so. I'd have to read up on it to be exact, but anytime you let a primer sit, it usually gets harder and harder and harder, and you have to open up the pores in the primer again to get the paint to adhere and attach to it properly. But yeah, this is just a 3M Body Schutz undercoating. I used this on my Firebird. It worked great. It looks great. Underside of the car, great. And so yeah, I'll be using that next. There's a special little gun I can go into when I get to spraying this stuff. So that's just a little preview onto what I'm going to do in this video and try and get it all into one clip. So next time you see this, I'll have it all masked off. I'll show you how I had it all masked off. I'll shut the camera off. I'm going to finish cleaning the wheel wells up on each side of the car because all of that area is going to get undercoated all in one fell swoop. And I'll show you where I'm going to run my tank line on the front of the firewall. I've seen them all in different locations, but I want my firewall to be painted, but at some point there's going to be a seam in there where it goes to undercoating, and that's the underside of the car. So yeah, the other thing, right after I prime, and I'll show this later in the video too, I'm going to go ahead and use Transtar's seam sealant, and that's going to run over every seam in this car. There's a lot more than you might think on there, so after I prime it, I'll probably end up using 2 or 3 tubes of this. It's a flexible sealer. I'll probably end up using it on the inside of the car as well before I go ahead and do the lizard skin applications, and we'll go into more to that later. But yeah, a little bit about what I'm going to do next. Okay, so I figured I'd show the next step here. I've got the car masked off. You know, it's not the end of the world if a little bit of primer and or undercoated get in other parts of the car, but it's just going to make cleanup a lot easier. I mean, obviously when I'm going to do body work and everything else, a lot of easily sanded, but here's my transition on the firewall. You know, I'm going to just run that seam up the inner tunnel and across the bottom, and obviously I'm still going to have to end up doing some touch up after I have this car undercoated, because when, you know, it's not on the rotisserie, I'll need to get to those points and just make sure they're sealed up nice and coated. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm going to run the undercoating. It's going to come across the top, right through here, and then all across the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and shoot, you know, just a light layer of primer first. It's a 2K primer, like I said. It attaches to metal, can be painted on, you can build it up and block it out as well. But you can see I kind of plug up all the major holes. One cool thing, you know, if you have a lot of bolt holes, you can see I've got the seatbelt holes and whatnot. I went ahead and used earplugs. You know, I bought boxes of earplugs from Harbor Freight, and they're not very comfortable, but they sure work for that. So you can see I moused off the end of the subframe connectors, where I'm going to be welding those back to the subframe once I get it back in the car and square it off. Wheel wells are cleaned up enough. You know, I left some of that undercoating in there. Dug out most of the seam sealer, and it'll actually just be an extra layer of protection. It is stuck hard. You know, that's the main concern. As long as it's nice and stuck to the car, it'll be good. So yeah, I've got that all ready to go. Next I'll go ahead and we'll mix up some primer and shoot some primer on it. Alright, gonna go ahead and show mixing some primer. I've got my helpers in here. You know, really cleanliness is everything, and you know, I've blown this car off with air probably 2 or 3 different times. Trying to sweep up the floors pretty well. You know, probably a little overkill for just spraying some primer on the undercoating of the car, but since I've enlisted some help, you know, they're just wiping everything down with a light layer of thinner, just to kind of clean the rest of the little particles of dust off, so I get good adhesion. So this primer, it's kind of unique in that it can be put directly onto bare metal, over paint, what have you. This is the 4-in-1 high build stuff. I'm probably not going to bother reducing it, but it says right on the can, you know, every manufacturer will have all the instructions, and just make sure to read instruction on any product you buy to make sure that it'll work with itself. That's one thing. You know, people use different products. There's so many out there, and they'll all do different things. But anyways, I'm gonna probably start off small. You know, this is a little just a little 10-ounce mixing cup, but right on the side it's a measure cup. So here's 4-to-1. You can kind of see this is, you know, you can mix a 4-to-1 as well. I'm going to ignore this last column. And 4-to-1 ratio for this stuff, for this primer. The hardener's back there. So do 4 parts primer, 1 part hardener, and it's right here. It'll mix 4-to-1 if I depending on how much I want, but 5 and 5, I'm going to put as much as possible. I might do more than 1 batch. I really don't know how far this is going to go. I expect it might be enough to do this car, just 1 batch, but worst case I'll mix up a second one real quick and put in my HVLP gun. You know, at the gun, I'm probably going to start off running about 20 psi at the gun, and then work it from there. This has a 1.8 tip in it, which is a little heavy, but that's about right. You know, again, this primer says right on it, you can, for this type of primer, run anywhere between a tip size 1.6, I don't know if you're going to see that, 1.6 to 2. So I'm 1.8. I'm right between them. I'm going to run with that. You know, 2 to 3 coats. That's if you're blocking it. You know, I'm just really going to probably run 1 light coat. And obviously there's your cure times. There's your mixing ratio right there, 4-to-1. There we go. And yeah, I'm not going to bother show mixing it, but you know, when you're mixing anything, paints, you're not introducing air into it. Just stir it. Stir it for a while. The solids are going to settle on the bottom of these cans, so just stir and stir and stir and stir. And when I go to mix anything, I'm going to obviously use a filter. I have this little handy device, holds the filter and pours it into the paint. You know, but yeah, stir really well, and then you should be good to go. I have ventilation fans in here. I wear a lot of respirators for this application. and I'm probably going to see what happens. It's supposed to be like 77 today, so I'm thinking that after maybe 2 or 3 hours, this will be good enough to do the undercoating on, and I'll separate that in a different video. But yeah, well, let's mix up some primer. I'll go ahead and mix it in the mixing cup here, mix that first, and then mix them together, pour them in the gun, and rock and roll. You know, every gun's going to be different as far as pressure, and it's kind of a trick to play with all the settings on there, fan size and whatnot. I'm not going to bother going over all that, because really I'm just trying to shoot some primer on this. You know, I've got a whole separate air station here set up with a separate, I have 2 air dryers. That's the one right at the gun for painting on this side. And yeah, it should look a lot different when we're done here, and I'll do some time lapse and we'll shoot some primer. All right, as you can see, priming went pretty well. I've never used that gun before, and I haven't shot primer in a couple years, so I had to play with it a little bit. I actually ended up running the pressure at the gun around 22 PSI. I was playing with the flow and whatnot, and primer, you're really wanting it to flow, so I'm really glad I went with the bigger tip on that for the most part. Took a lot more primer than I thought as well. I mean, you know, I ended up mixing a third little batch there. I need to get some bigger mixing cups for sure if you're going to do the whole underside of the car like this. But yeah, I got it on pretty well. So the next step in the process, I'll probably do a little time lapse next on it, but I'm going to go ahead and use seam sealer on all the seams. And this is, again, Transtar stuff. It's just like a tube of caulking. It's a tube of caulking basically, but I'll put it in the caulking gun and rock and roll. Now, I want the seams to look fairly nice, so you know, when I'm working on houses and anything else, you know, I'll clip it at a slight angle, pop the seal on the inside, and just use my caulking gun to go around and all the seams. Now, there's a lot of seams on these cars, so I'll time lapse it. I imagine I'm going to use at least 2 or 3 of these, maybe more, we'll see. But basically, anywhere there's a seam on this car. And I'm going to go a little step further. You know, I'm even going to seam seal in these brackets for the seat belts. You know, I just don't want junk to collect in there over time and then rust. You know, dirt and junk gets in there, gets moisture and rust. So I'll probably put seam seal around those. I won't bother with some of these things, but just where the sheet metal's touching itself, you know, right where the body's spot welded all the way around the car to the underpans, I'm going to seam seal all those just lightly, making sure they're filled in completely. That way, if water or moisture and junk can't get up under those lips, I'm going to seam seal right where I did the subframe connector, so it'll basically hide the weld, but it also just seals it. You know, just make sure, again, moisture can't get in any little teeny crack or crevice anywhere in the car. So this will have a ton of black stripes on it when I get done. Even my pans where I welded in, they're really hard to see the welds with primer. They'll be even harder when I go to when I undercoat them. But if I put a light coat of seam sealer on there and then use my finger and, you know, with a glove and smooth it out, it'll kind of transition it and it'll lock that thing tight and seal everything in. You know, along the firewall up here where I ended up putting the new pan in, there's a seam here that's part of the car. The new pan there wasn't, but I'm going to go ahead and run the seam sealer down these cracks to make it kind of mimic what was here before. So yeah, I'll go ahead and time lapse that, but it'll basically wrap up the underside of this portion of it before I end up going and doing the undercoating portion, which again isn't too bad. But I'll probably go ahead and split it up between 2 videos. This will kind of be the prep stage for the undercoating, and then I'll do the second one of actually undercoating it. I don't actually think I have enough undercoating. I bet you this thing's going to take at least 3 or 4, judging by how much I just went through there with primer. So yeah, we'll take it from there. Hey there, so obviously I did a little clip there on caulking. You know, that was 1 tube. I'll finish off the wheel wells in the back with probably 1 more tube. Won't bother videotaping that. But yeah, so I went ahead and did the seams where I welded on the pans just to blend it in. that sealer works pretty good for me. It's thick, but it kind of levels out, but just a little. You know, where I'm going over my seams on the welds in these locations, I just went back and forth. You know, obviously I have a real thick glove on, and just kind of leveling it out a little bit. It'll blend right into the seams, and once the undercoating's on it, you won't be able to tell there's a seam there, not without really picking at it or, you know, scraping it off completely. So yeah, it looks pretty good. You know, this is way overkill. The factory doesn't do this on these seams, and you know, you do need to be a little careful. There's a couple of these lower holes in the subframe that I am going to leave. That way, if moisture does ever get up above these frame rails, you know, when the car's sitting flat, of course, it'll have a spot to drain out. So there are some seams, you know, some of these holes, you don't want to plug everything up completely. But, you know, water and mud will have a heck of a time getting up in there, and these won't really ever get plugged up. You know, it's not a 4x4 or anything. So at least that's my take on it. I don't really know what official is, but I really like the idea of, you know, keeping water and mud and moisture out of all these seams up inside here. Again, the low point where these bumpers are, you know, that metal behind there's actually higher. It'll have a spot to drain out here, so I left a couple openings on this side as well, just to let moisture drain out if it ever does get up inside there. But yeah, every seam across the body, I'm gonna do every seam. These are on where the fuel tank is. I'll do all those. Obviously, these are open though, and those will be lower points. So if moisture did ever get into here, it has a way to get out. But other than that, she'll be sealed up tight. And the next video I do, I'll show the undercoating I'm going to use. You know, doing this on the rotisserie was huge. Obviously, I've been under a car for days and days, upside down with lights and glasses and everything else, and this makes it so much easier. So hope that you learned something, or at least got to see what I'm doing in the shop, and we'll go from there. Thanks.